There once was a town called Boston Bay. Redcoats camped there night and day. The rebels stood on the hills up high, but they could not make the warships fly. No boom, no bang, no iron roar, just brave men waiting and wanting more. They had the will, they had the ground, but something big was nowhere found. Knox, Knox, roll the guns from frozen lakes to rebel suns. Books to bring stood cannon fire, dragging freedom through snow and mire. When Boston heard that thunder sound, the British knew they were not safe in town. Henry Knox sold books by day, studied wars the British way. Mortars, howitzers, iron and steel. He read how battles turn the wheel. He said, George, I know just the trick. Big guns win when walls are thick. 60 tons on wooden sleds, oxen straining frozen threads across the lakes and mountainsides, through cracking ice and swallowed tides. A noble train, inch by inch, history hauled by grit and cinch. Washington said, give it a try, spare no trouble, aim it high. Knox, Knox, roll the guns through the snow and winter suns. Iron teeth and timber frame, logistics is the rebel game. When Boston woke to cannon eyes, freedom stood on Dorchester Heights.
It's hour 3 of a Tuesday morning, the 17th of February, 2026. The hour brought to you by the McPherson Financial Group. Headline at BillMick.com today, ruffled feathers, Olympic and otherwise. We've been on otherwise for the second hour of the show. And in our third hour of a Tuesday, it's Dave Bowman and Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. Getting into some of the logistics and tactics that were leading up to our Declaration of Independence in July of 1776. Dave, where are we going this morning, sir?
Going way back to the beginning of Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live, we had a discussion once upon a time, and I don't remember who the caller was, but we had a caller once who was complaining that, you know, only 4 or 5 guys actually did anything, so why pay attention to any of this stuff? And I remember thinking at the time, that's part of the problem. Today we're going to take a look at one of those guys who's not one of those 4 or 5 guys, but without whom we don't win. And that's something that's meaningful, I think, in a lot of ways. In November of 1775, Washington had taken over what was now the Continental Army. He was struggling because everything at that point was still militias. The enlistments were expiring and people were going home. There's going to be an incident later on during the Constitutional Convention where the delegates from Connecticut get mad because one of the delegates from Virginia points out the fact that all their militias left in December of 1775 and basically says, you guys didn't do your part. That's what's actually happening. We've got Connecticut regiments that are just leaving hand over foot. Washington knows that he needs an army of 20,000 people. He's got one of about 8,000 people, only 5,000 of which are actually combat ready. And somehow or another, he has managed to encircle the British in Boston and trap them inside of Boston. Boston is basically an impregnable fortress. There's no way to get in there. And the British feel very secure in there, but as we've talked about, they're also very hungry as the winter goes on. They're having problems with supplies and that sort of thing. But Washington, on the other side, doesn't really have any way of getting out. This week in 1776, he will actually hold a war council at which he presents his plan to all the other colonial leaders to attack Boston. He's going to go in there and actually, just basically charge across the Mystic River through Charleston and say, we're here to fight you, and we're going to end this thing in one fell swoop. On a good note, most of the other generals, in fact, all of the other generals say, yeah, that's a really bad idea. That's not going to work. A, we don't have enough people, and B, there's a lot of British troops over there. What we need here, George, is some artillery. because artillery is what's going to win this whole thing. But at this particular point in time, they don't have any artillery. Now, if you go back to just after Lexington and Concord, if you'll recall, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold captured Fort Ticonderoga up on the Canadian border in upstate New York. Fort Ticonderoga is full of artillery. But how do you get that artillery from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston, where it's needed? You don't have any infrastructure. You don't have any ship. How do you do this? And that's part of the problem. In November, Washington turned to a young colonel by the name of Henry Knox and said, "Can you do it?" And Knox said, "Of course I can." And so Washington said, "Go forth and do." And Henry Knox took off on horseback, went all the way to Fort Ticonderoga, and started the process by which he would bring that artillery to Boston.
And we pick it up in just a minute here on WMMB. Links to Dave Does History on the show page today at BillMick.com. Just click on that Ruffled Feathers page and you'll find that link to Dave Does History, which we're in the middle of right now. You know what gets me, Dave, is Henry Knox at this time, 25 years old and entrusted with this and a different brand of 25-year-olds at the time.
Henry Knox is one of those, if there are American stories, Henry Knox is one of them. Keep in mind that at the time we're talking about, he's 25. At 9, his father essentially abandoned him. His father was a shipbuilder who got in some bad investments and had to leave, went to the West Indies. And so he just leaves Henry Knox behind at 9 years old. Knox is forced to leave the schools. He doesn't go to school beyond 9 years of age. He becomes a clerk in a bookbinder where he spends his time in this bookstore essentially autodidacting himself. He teaches himself from 9 years old on, Bill. He teaches himself to read, but that's not enough. He teaches himself to read in Greek and Latin, where he reads Plutarch's Lives, he reads Caesar's commentaries, and this engenders in him a desire to study military matters. He learns to speak French on his own. He studies Tacitus, he studies Caesar, and he finds himself as a member of what is known as the Honorable and Ancient Society of Artillery in Massachusetts. Now, this is a militia unit that is dedicated to artillery, and they are taught by and it's roughly equivalent to an ROTC program today, but it's run by the British, and he learns from the British how to run artillery. He's 15, 16 years old, and he's already become a member of this Ancient and Honorable Society of Artillery. By the way, this society still exists today in Massachusetts. You can, if you meet the criteria, which none of us do, you can join this Society of Artillery, this Ancient and Honorable Society, which doesn't even list Henry Knox on their list of honorable members, but that's a story for another day. In 1771, Henry Knox has become successful enough that he opens his own bookstore in Boston. It's called the London Bookstore, and it becomes a huge hit. British officers, with whom he's well associated with because he's, the artillerist, hang out at his shop because he's got more books than other people do. He's got better selection. He's got better stuff like that. And he becomes his own publisher. In fact, he comes across a pamphlet that he finds appealing. It's about the relationship between Britain and the colonies. And it's one of the earliest examples of people not necessarily calling for independence, but calling for changes in the relationship between the government of England and the government of Massachusetts Bay. That pamphlet is published anonymously, but it turns out later to have been written by Alexander Hamilton, who is also very young. He's like 19, 18, 19, somewhere in there at the time that this happens. Henry Knox is one of those people that is in the middle of everything. In fact, he had been an eyewitness to the Boston Massacre, ends up as a witness testimony at the trial. He's right in the middle of everything, but he's also very pro-colonial. And he's one of the earliest people to really jump on the bandwagon of independence. He marries a daughter of a high-ranking Loyalist official, but she defies her family. And after Lexington and Concord, they're forced to flee Boston because they're revolutionaries. His sword that he has is actually sewn into his wife's coat because, the British troops would steal it if they or confiscate it, I guess, if they caught him with it. The important thing to keep in mind here, Bill, is by this point, he's 25 years old. He is offered a commission as a colonel of artillery in the Continental Army, as the Continental Army is being formed in November of 1775. The reason he's offered this commission is because he's a member of the Ancient and Honorable Society of Artillery. He knows how to use artillery. He's also very young. Washington is looking for a chief artillerist for the Army. He has several people that are qualified, but they're also very old. And in the oldest one's case, he doesn't want anything to do with all this stuff. He's like, well, look, I'm pro-independence, but I'm just too old to be going into the field. Plus, I hate to point this out, but you don't actually have any artillery. So what would I do as the chief artillerist? And so he turns the job down. In November 1775, Knox comes to Washington and says, hey, I got an idea for you. What if I go to Fort Ticonderoga, pick out the best cannons that they have, and bring them back here? And Washington looks at him and says, it's November, right? it's winter's coming on. What, have you thought about that? Well, it turns out that Henry Knox is also trained as an engineer, and yes, he has thought about that. And he has realized that if we are going to do this, literally the only time we can do it is in the dead of winter. And so he is going to go. Washington says, fine, go and do. Henry Knox rides to Ticonderoga, where he is going to start one of the most incredible stories of a noble train of artillery that he is going to drag 300 miles from North New York all the way to Boston. And he's going to do it in the dead of winter.
Gosh, that has to be a harrowing trip. We're going to find out about it as today Dave Does History continues right here on Bill Mick Live. Good to have you with us on WMMB.
It's a take on history you won't find anywhere else. Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live.
The McPherson Financial Group bringing you this hour of our Tuesday morning. You can follow us on Instagram at WMMB Radio. Let's get back into our look at history this morning with Dave Bowman. So, Dave, Knox is going to Fort Ticonderoga and going to travel these, what did you say, 300 miles in the dead of winter, bringing artillery back to Boston to try to free it from the siege of the British there. It doesn't sound like a fun trip.
Well, I can't imagine that it was, but for somebody that's 25 years old and a colonel of artillery is it's there. Now, physically, Henry Knox is a very imposing figure. We always talk about how George Washington is, very tall and handsome and all that kind of stuff. Henry Knox is 6'3", weighs almost 300 pounds, and he's very affable. People like him. He has a great sense of humor. He's just a presence, physical presence. He reminds me a lot of Benjamin Harrison, who we talked about when we talked about the Raleigh Tavern. He's got that same kind of presence in a room. Knox is going to ride to Fort Ticonderoga. Now, it's only about 200 miles to the fort from Boston. He rides up there. He arrives in Ticonderoga on December 5th and begins immediately to sort and choose the artillery that he wants to take back to Boston. Now, again, this is December. Winter is coming, and these pieces have been just sitting here since Ticonderoga was captured back in early 75. Now, just by way of reminder, Fort Ticonderoga was captured by Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold, who competed about who gets the credit for it. They didn't so much capture it as just wake it up. I mean, the British troops there were basically drunk and asleep. And the American troops that have been holding it since then have basically been drunk and asleep because it's in the middle of nowhere. And
what you do up there, apparently.
Yeah. But Henry Knox gets there. He chooses 59 pieces of artillery. Now, this includes cannons, mortars, and howitzers, which, again, I'm not an artillerist, but there are differences between the way these work. One of them is a 24-pounder that is named Old Sow. SOW, old pig, I guess. It's and these guns all taken together weigh 60 tons, 120,000 pounds of brass, iron, plus they're going to grab lead and flints and cannonballs and this kind of stuff to take with them. And the idea here is they're going to transport these guns by boat down Lake George, then transfer them over to sleds to drag them across the Berkshire Mountains, the Connecticut River, the Hudson River, all the way to Boston. And the sooner we get there, obviously, the better off this is going to be. But there's still that wintertime thing. And this is one of those things where we read it today and we go, well, it doesn't make any sense. Dave, why wouldn't they wait until the springtime? I mean, isn't that called the campaign season for a reason? That's when you can do things. But Henry Knox is an engineer as well as an artillerist, and he has a trick up his sleeve that will utterly amaze you, and I guarantee you will put it in the back of your head and go, if I'm ever in this same situation, this is how I can solve it too.
Dave Bowman with us, taking us through history here, Dave. And so he's got a plan to get all this heavy artillery back to Boston in the middle of winter. What's he doing?
59 pieces, 120,000 pounds or 60 tons, depending on, how you want to look at that. 43 of these are iron and brass cannons. 8 are mortars. 6 are what are called cohorns, which is a portable mortar, and 2 are howitzers. These are the stuff. This is the stuff you need for a siege, which is what we've got going on in Boston. And he's going to get all of this stuff back there. It starts by loading all these guns onto gondolas and scows and bateaus, and they're going to float these down Lake George before it freezes. Now, one of the boats actually sinks, but the water's pretty shallow, so they manage to bail the boat out, refloat it, reload it, and they make it all the way down, even though they face a lot of cruel thaws, as Knox will talk about. In other words, it's warming up, and contrary winds. Now, once they get to the bottom of Lake George, he gets 42 sleds, 80 yoke of oxen. Now, there is a lot of debate about whether or not he had ox or not, depending on who you read and which historian you read. They weren't oxen, they were horses. It doesn't really matter. The point is, they needed animals. They needed horsepower to pull these sleds because men aren't going to be able to do it. Even though Bill and I do it in the video that I made for this, they're not really going to be able to do it. Now, he sends a letter to Washington, and he says, look, I've got the cannon. We're here, and it's going to be a, as he calls it, noble train of artillery. And as he begins to drag this stuff back over the Berkshire Mountains, he gets to the top of the Berkshire Mountains. He's impressed with the vista that he has from up there. He writes to his wife about what an incredible view it is. But they're going to have a problem. And the problem is that the Hudson River is frozen, but it's not frozen enough to cross. Remember, I told you it was wintertime. Knox knows that water traveling in a river under an ice, under a sheet of ice, is pressurized. In other words, if you cut a hole in the ice, what does the water do?
Comes out.
It comes out. And so he actually has his team cut holes in the ice of the Hudson River, lets the water flow up because it wants to, that's what it does, and then it refreezes because it's cold outside and literally thickens the surface of the ice.
That's a smart guy.
He's an engineer. And this allows them to drag these sleds across the Hudson River without problem. Well, there is a problem. One of the 18-pounder cannons actually falls off the sled, breaks through the ice, and it sinks to the bottom. But we're Americans, so we don't take that for an answer. We're not losing anything here. The locals show up with ropes and horses and oxen and everything, and they manage to get that 18-pounder off the bottom of the river, reload it back onto its sled, and off they go. The mechanics of this are incredible. You've got teamsters, you've got people checking ropes, you've got cinches and all kinds of stuff going through there. Knox will write of his diary of this thing that it's just an incredible trip. And by the time in late January that they reach Framingham and Cambridge in Massachusetts, it's taken them 40 days. They have covered 300 miles. They have not lost a single gun. And oh, by the way, when they stop in Cambridge, the people in Cambridge are so excited that they want Old Sal fired off for them. They want to hear this gun fired. And so they put on a little show for them, firing it off the gun. They also start shipping out all the references to King George and rebranding the guns with George Washington's name. But now we're in Massachusetts. Now Washington has his artillery.
And we'll bring it to conclusion when we continue in moments on WMMB.
Thanks for making WMMB the Space Coast's #1 preset on the iHeartRadio app. The top of the app, right at your fingertips. Anytime.
The McPherson Financial Group bringing you the hour. Dave Bowman with us with Dave Does History. So Knox has these guns and this artillery back to Massachusetts, Dave. Washington's got to be happy.
He's happy, but he also still has a problem, which is it's really cold because it's winter, which means you can't dig in the ground to emplace these guns per se. And what are we going to do with them? We in general, we know we need to get them pointed at Boston, but how do we do that? Well, he decides that where they're going to go is a place called Dorchester Heights, which you'll understand that today Boston is much different than it was in 1776. If you look at a map, you might have a hard time locating Dorchester Heights because it's all been filled in. But it kind of sits to the south edge of the harbor, overlooking the harbor. So in other words, anybody going in or out of the harbor has to go past these guns, or past Dorchester Heights, which is where Washington decides we're going to occupy Dorchester Heights, and that's where we're going to put these guns. It's not as easy as it seems because, again, the ground is frozen, but we're going to figure it out. On the night of March the 4th, they use a plan put together by some of the other engineers by the name of Rufus Putnam. The Army, in total silence, Bill, there's no noise being made, although some of the other artillery is used on the other side of town. They just kind of start firing off rounds as a distraction. Rufus Putnam and the Army goes up to the top of Dorchester Heights. They occupy the heights, and they build fortifications above the ground. They don't dig into the ground. They build them above the ground. They use hay bales, timber, barrels that they fill with earth, and they build essentially a fort on top of Dorchester Heights, which is where they put most of these guns that are now aimed down at the British, who, by the way, this is done in total silence, 3,000 men working in silence. And in the morning, General Howe, who's the British commander at the time, wakes up and looks up, and all he sees are these guns on top of this hill aimed at him. Yesterday, they weren't there. Now they are. He actually says, my God, these fellows have done more work in one night than I could make my army do in 3 months.
That's something.
It's not only something, but what do you do? I mean, at this point, if you're the British, you're hungry, you're starving, you can't. Now you're Now you're facing artillery, which could literally smash your ships to pieces. You don't have any way to do anything. But he's a British general, and so he decides, well, what we need to do is go charging up Dorchester Heights and get rid of these guns. Now, this is not unlike what they tried at Bunker Hill a few months earlier. We'll try that same tactic. It's possible that it might have worked. We'll never know. Because on the day that the British were going to try this, a huge, violent storm, what they would call a nor'easter, hits Boston and basically breaks up the attack before it can even get started. It's a storm that we call Kind Heaven, which has been sent our way and basically keeps the British from attacking us on Dorchester Heights. And so on March 17th, 1776, the British have realized finally that the game in Boston is over. It's done. It's up. The British Army, thousands of loyalists, load onto ships, and what is known as Evacuation Day, they sail out of Boston Harbor and they leave to go to Halifax, which, as you know, is up in Canada. This will become the first major victory of the colonials during the war. The first major one. We lost at Bunker Hill. Yeah, we won at Ticonderoga, and the Canadian invasion that we haven't even touched on yet, isn't going well. But this, we have chased the British out of Boston, and to this day, they still celebrate Evacuation Day. There's a lot of cool things that go on with that, greased poles and the likes of that. We don't have time to get into all that. But it is a moment of great accomplishment for both Washington and the Continental Army, because not only have they chased the British out of Boston, but they basically did it without firing a shot. All they did was haul artillery up to the top of the hill and say, you give up?
Look what we have. Yeah.
And the British said, my God, and left. If the story ended there, by the way, Boston is free for the rest of the war. It never faces British occupation again. Henry Knox, who is a colonel at this time, is made the chief of artillery for the Continental Army. He will go on to serve at Trenton. He will actually direct, because remember, he is an engineer, he will actually direct the Delaware crossing, Washington's famous crossing in the Delaware. That doesn't happen without Henry Knox and his ideas for how to get across that. He also serves at Monmouth, and he is there at Yorktown directing the artillery, which has a huge impact at the Battle of Yorktown, the Siege of Yorktown, when the war will finally end. Knox will actually go on to become the first U.S. Secretary of War and oversee the foundational moments of the U.S. military, both its Army and its Navy. He is the guy who oversees the construction of the USS Constitution, the ship that we so proudly celebrate even today. And he becomes one of the founding members of the Society of Cincinnati, which is a organization of fraternal order of Revolutionary War officers who celebrate the fact that George Washington, much like Cincinnatus in the old Roman Republic, wins the war and then goes back to farming. He doesn't seek power, and they encourage that. Even today, the Society of Cincinnati still exists, and they still push for the same kinds of things. In 1806, however, Henry Knox retires to his home in Montpelier. He's 56 years old, and things have not gone well for him outside of the war or outside of government. His investments are not paying off. He tried to build some industry up in what will become Maine. Doesn't go well. He is eating dinner and accidentally swallows a chicken bone, and that chicken bone causes a fatal infection. And Henry Knox dies in 1806 at the age of 56. He leaves behind a legacy as the indispensable man of American logistics and of accomplishment. And when Jefferson sits down to write those words about King George, he is making war against us. Well, war requires two sides. It requires, both parties to be willing to fight. And it's Henry Knox who enables Washington to really fight that war.
We'll pick it up in just 1 minute here on WMMB. 321-768-1240. Let you get your thoughts in play as we wrap up Dave Does History on a Tuesday. I'm surprised with the feats that you have described here, the trip from Ticonderoga back to Boston, all of the other integral things that Knox had done, that we don't hear more of him, Dave. It's just really kind of surprising to me.
It's surprising, but it's also really kind of typical of the way we view history, don't we? I mean, it goes back to that caller. Hey, only 3 or 4 guys actually did anything. Well, I remind people all the time of this. General Washington led the Army, but the Army was made up of tens of thousands of sergeants and privates and corporals who actually did the fighting, who actually accomplished these things, and without that, it doesn't happen. Henry Knox, of course, is the indispensable man of the indispensable man. He is Washington's right-hand guy. And in doing so, his accomplishments, you're right, they have been minimized. Even many of the histories, Rick Atkinson in his book, only a few pages are dedicated to this. And it seems like we've tried to forget him, and I'm not really sure why, because without him, I don't think we win that.
Doesn't happen. Yeah. Line 1, you're up on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. Ed in Melbourne.
Yeah, Ed, what do you think here?
Unbelievable. Actually not. And thanks, Dave, for the history lesson. Henry Knox, pretty much a genius, did a workaround and made it happen. And you know what? It was just meant to be. But great. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate that. Line 2, you're on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Good morning, Mario, Cape Canaveral.
Go ahead, Mario.
This was a fascinating history. I loved it. Thank you. I met a member over here in Cape Canaveral at the VFW. I met a member of the Ancient Order of Artillerymen of Massachusetts from Faneuil Hall a couple of years ago. Also, I grew up right next to Knox Trail, the Knox Trail where Knox went through. It's called Knox Trail Road. And all through the Berkshires where he went, they have roads, and it's called Knox Trail Road. They're all called Knox Trail Road, wherever you go. Anyway, what a fascinating history. Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mario. Appreciate that. Line 1, you're up on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Hey, big guys. This is Keith in Palm Bay.
Got to make it quick, pal. Go ahead.
Don't know if I missed it or not, but is Fort Knox named after him?
I have no idea, Dave.
I looked for that, and I'm not absolutely certain. What I looked for was Navy ships named after him. There are no Navy ships named after him. Even the Knox-class frigates aren't named after him. It's possible that it is named after him, probable that it is, but I don't actually know. I mean, he did invent what was essentially the U.S. Military Academy. It wasn't called that then, but he built our military from nothing into something. So it's possible. I guess I could Google it real quick, but
Dave,
you can do that.
From What the Frock this weekend, I thought you and Rod had a good show this weekend. You are actually researching your ancestry, and you have found multiple of your ancestors who were involved in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, it's surprising. I wanted to join something called the Sons of the American Revolution. My mother was a daughter of the American Revolution. And after I sent in my initial application with my initial ancestor, I started getting emails from people going, wait a minute, are you related to this person, this person? And literally have traced my family all the way back to Virginia. We have a captain in the Continental Army. It's fascinating to me. It's not as pleasant sometimes as you want it to be, but at the same time, yeah, my connections to this are becoming more and more each day.
That's fantastic. Now, Dave Does History does more than just the 1 hour with us weekly. He's got other events that he deals with throughout the week. You can take those podcasts, the What the Frock podcast, and you can make them a preset on the top of the iHeartRadio app, just like you do ours. So stay up to date with Dave and everything he's doing. Dave, we really appreciate it. It's been a good Tuesday, my friend. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm glad to do it.
One dark night, no drum, no shout. Cannons moved while shells flew out. By morning light, the hills were crowned with iron mouths, ain't harbor bound. Jethro Howe just rubbed his eyes, said they worked a miracle overnight. Ships boxed in, no place to stay. Pack your bags, we sail away. Knock, knocks, hear it ring. Books became a booming thing. No fancy ranks or noble birth, just muscle math and frozen earth. Lost in what without a fight, because someone knew how to move the mind. So when you ask how wars are run, remember Knox and Roll.